Please, someone help. My daughter can't breathe, begged the billionaire CEO, his voice trembling with fear. But no one answered. His mansion, filled with wealth and power, suddenly felt hollow as his world crumbled with each desperate second. Then, just as hope seemed lost, a quiet voice cut through the panic and changed everything. Hello, my beautiful family. Welcome back. If this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now let's go back to 6 hours earlier where it all started. Larry had stood in his corner office on the 63rd floor, Manhattan sprawling beneath him like a kingdom awaiting orders. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who had conquered everything he'd touched. Sharp suit, confident posture, the kind of presence that made boardrooms fall silent when he entered. Gentlemen, the acquisition is final, Larry said into the speakerphone, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Contract signed. We move forward tomorrow. Cheers erupted from the conference call. Another billion-dollar deal closed. Another company added to his empire. Larry ended the call with a satisfied smile and checked his Patek Philippe watch. 6:47 p.m. Time to head home. His penthouse stretched across the top 3 floors of Manhattan's most exclusive tower, where marble gleamed under crystal chandeliers and every surface whispered wealth. The walls were adorned with original Rothkos and Basquiats. The living room alone could fit 3 average apartments inside it. This wasn't just a home, it was a monument to everything Larry Smith had built from nothing. When he walked through the door that evening, Becca ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his legs. Daddy, look what I made! His 9-year-old daughter held up a crayon drawing of their family, stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Larry scooped her up, kissing her forehead. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Just like you. Everything was perfect, controlled, exactly as he'd planned it. He didn't know that in 2 hours his world would shatter. At 8:43 p.m., Becca was practicing piano in the music room, her fingers stumbling through a Mozart piece her instructor had assigned. Larry sat in his study reviewing quarterly reports, the sound of her playing drifting pleasantly through the open door. Then the music stopped. Not gradually, suddenly, like someone had cut the strings. Larry looked up from his laptop. Becca? Silence. A chill crept down his spine. He stood, moving toward the music room. Becca. Honey? That's when he heard it, a thin, desperate wheezing sound. He found her collapsed beside the piano bench, her small body curled on the Persian rug, her face already pale, lips tinged with blue. Her chest heaved violently, fighting for air that wouldn't come. Becca! Larry dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he pulled her into his arms. Baby, what's wrong? Talk to me! Her eyes were wide with terror, one hand clawing at her throat. The wheezing grew worse, a horrible rattling sound that made his blood turn to ice. Asthma attack. Severe. Larry's mind raced. The inhaler. Where was her emergency inhaler? He spotted it on the side table, grabbed it with trembling hands, and pressed it to her lips. 1 pump. 2. But his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't position it correctly. Was he doing it right? Why wasn't it working? Hold on, sweetheart. Hold on. His voice cracked. He fumbled for his phone, nearly dropping it. Dialed 911. All circuits are busy. Please try your call again later. No. He tried again. Same automated message. The city's emergency lines were overloaded. Some kind of system failure he'd heard about on the news but never imagined would affect him. Larry scrolled frantically through his contacts. Dr. Harrison, his family physician. Straight to voicemail. Dr. Chen, the pediatric specialist who treated Becca since birth. No answer. His personal assistant. Voicemail. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into agonizing eternity. Becca's breathing grew shallower, more desperate. Her fingernails were turning blue. Please, Larry heard himself begging into the phone, leaving another voicemail. Please, someone help. My daughter can't breathe. All his money, all his connections, all his power. None of it mattered. He couldn't buy his way out of this, couldn't negotiate, couldn't control it. His daughter was dying in his arms, and he was completely, utterly helpless. Sweat poured down his face. His vision blurred with tears. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold her. The marble floors felt cold beneath his knees. The same floors he'd imported from Italy. The same floors that had cost more than most people earned in a year. Meaningless. All of it meaningless. "Somebody help us!" he screamed into the empty penthouse. "Please!" Becca's eyes began to flutter closed. No, not like this. He couldn't lose her. Then from the doorway leading to the kitchen, a figure appeared. Diana Roberts moved with the kind of calm that only comes from having walked through fire before. She was 52, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her hands still damp from washing dishes. She'd worked in the Smith household for 3 years, serving meals, folding laundry, cleaning rooms, existing in the margins of their gilded life. Her presence was so quiet, so constant, that Larry had long ago stopped really seeing her. He knew she had a son, or was it a daughter? He couldn't remember. He'd never asked. But now those same hands that had scrubbed his floors reached for his daughter. "Mr. Smith," Diana's voice cut through his terror, steady as stone. "Let me see her." Larry's arms tightened instinctively around Becca. His eyes were wild, desperate. I can't get help. The doctors aren't answering. 911 is down." "I don't know what to do." "I know." Diana knelt beside him, her dark eyes meeting his with an authority he'd never seen before. Not from her, not from the woman who quietly served his meals and asked if he needed anything else. "But I can help her. You need to trust me right now." Something in her tone, certain, unshakable, commanding, cut through his panic. His grip loosened. Diana took Becca gently but firmly, her movements precise and practiced. She laid the child flat on the floor, tilting her head back at a specific angle to open the airway. Her fingers pressed against Becca's neck, checking her pulse, counting silently. Then she reached for the inhaler Larry had fumbled with. "This needs to be timed with her breathing," Diana said, her voice calm but urgent. She positioned the inhaler correctly, waiting, watching Becca's struggling chest. "Now, Stephen." She administered the medication with expert precision, one hand supporting Becca's head, the other coordinating the inhaler perfectly with the child's desperate inhalations. "Breathe with me, baby," Diana murmured, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. "Slow. In through your nose if you can. That's it. Good girl." Larry watched, frozen, as Diana's hands moved with practiced confidence, checking airways, monitoring pulse, adjusting Becca's position to maximize oxygen flow. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guessing. This was skill. "How are you?" Larry started. "Not now," Diana said firmly, her eyes never leaving Becca. "Mr. Smith, I need you to get me a glass of water and a damp cloth. Can you do that?" The command in her voice snapped him out of his paralysis. Larry stumbled to his feet, rushing to the kitchen, grateful to have something, anything to do. When he returned 30 seconds later, Becca's color had already started to improve. Diana took the cloth, placing it gently on Becca's forehead. "That's it, sweetheart. You're doing so well. Keep breathing. Nice and slow." Minutes passed. Larry didn't know how many. Time had lost all meaning. But gradually, impossibly, Becca's breathing steadied, deepened. The blue tint faded from her lips. Color crept back into her cheeks. The vice around Larry's chest loosened for the first time since he'd heard the music stop. Finally, Becca's eyes fluttered open, confused and exhausted, but alive. "Daddy?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Larry's breath caught in a sob. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Diana smiled down at Becca, brushing sweat-soaked hair from the child's forehead with a tenderness that made Larry's throat tighten. "There you are," she whispered. "You gave us quite a scare." Becca's gaze drifted to Diana, recognition and confusion mixing in her tired eyes. "Miss Diana, you helped me?" "I did, and you were very brave." Diana stood slowly, smoothing her uniform with those same capable hands. She turned to Larry, her voice returning to its usual quiet professionalism. "She'll be okay now, Mr. Smith. When the phone lines come back up, you should still call Dr. Chen. Have him check her over. Make sure she rests tonight. No excitement, plenty of water. She turned to leave to return to the kitchen, to disappear back into the invisible spaces of his home as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But Larry couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what he'd just witnessed. He stared at Diana Roberts, this woman he'd seen every single day for 3 years, whose presence he'd taken for granted, like the air he breathed, whose name he barely remembered to use, and realized he didn't know her at all. "Diana," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "How did you—" She paused in the doorway and her back to him. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then quietly, "I was a nurse once, a long time ago." Before he could respond, before he could ask anything more, she was gone. Larry sat on the floor beside Becca, his hand still holding hers, his heart still racing. His daughter's breathing was steady now. Normal. The crisis had passed, but something else had shifted, something fundamental in the architecture of his understanding. His wealth hadn't saved her. His power hadn't saved her. His connections, his influence, his carefully cultivated network of the best doctors and specialists money could buy. None of it had mattered when it truly counted. The woman who had saved his daughter's life was the same woman he'd never bothered to know. The same woman whose birthday he'd never asked about. The same woman he'd reminded once irritably to use the back staircase instead of the main one. Shame burned hot in his chest. Larry looked around his penthouse, the imported marble, the priceless art, the custom furniture, and for the first time in his life, it all felt hollow, empty, like a beautiful cage he'd built around himself without realizing he was trapped inside. His daughter stirred in his arms, her small hands squeezing his fingers. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. "So much." But even as he held her, even as relief flooded through him, Larry couldn't stop thinking about Diana, about the secrets she carried, about the person she'd been before she'd become invisible in his home. He didn't yet know her full story, the years of medical training, the career she'd abandoned, the tragedy that had reshaped her path. He didn't know that she'd once saved lives in emergency rooms before fate forced her into a different kind of service. He didn't know that she'd been hiding in plain sight all along, carrying skills and wisdom he'd never thought to ask about. But he was beginning to understand something else. His life, his perfect, controlled, meticulously planned life, was built on blindness. He'd been so focused on commanding his empire that he'd never learned to see the people who made his world possible. And tonight, that blindness had almost cost him everything. Larry Smith had always believed that wealth gave him power, but Diana Roberts had just taught him a different truth. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply shows up in a moment of crisis and changes everything. As he carried Becca to her bedroom, her head resting on his shoulder, Larry made a silent promise. He would learn Diana's story. He would understand who she really was. Because the woman who had saved his daughter's life deserved to be seen, and his world would never be the same again. The next morning arrived wrapped in the kind of silence that follows storms, heavy, contemplative, changed. Larry hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in the chair beside Becca's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, grateful for every breath she took. Dar Chen had finally called back at midnight, listened to Larry's frantic recap, and promised to visit first thing in the morning. But it was Diana's instructions Larry had followed through the night. Water every hour, elevated pillows, windows cracked for fresh air. Diana's instructions. From the maid he'd barely known existed 24 hours ago. As dawn light crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Larry heard movement in the kitchen. The familiar sounds of breakfast preparation, cabinet doors opening, the coffee maker gurgling to life, the soft clink of dishes. Diana already at work, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't saved his daughter's life. Larry rose quietly, careful not to wake Becca, and made his way toward the kitchen. He found Diana at the counter cutting fresh fruit with practiced precision. She wore the same simple gray uniform she always did, her hair pulled back in that neat bun. The morning light caught the silver strands threaded through the black. Had they always been there? Had he never noticed? "Mr. Smith," Diana looked up, her expression neutral, professional. You're up early. I'm preparing breakfast. Oatmeal for Miss Becca, something gentle on her system. Coffee for you. It'll be ready in 10 minutes. Diana. Larry's voice came out rougher than intended. We need to talk. Something flickered across her face. Was it fear? Resignation? But she simply nodded, setting down the knife. Of course, sir. You were a nurse. Yes, sir. A long time ago. How long? Diana's hand stilled on the counter. For a moment, Larry thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, 15 years. I worked in emergency medicine for 15 years before I came here. 15 years. Larry felt the weight of that number. Why didn't you ever tell me? You never asked, Mr. Smith. There was no accusation in her voice, just simple fact. And it wasn't relevant to my position here. Wasn't relevant. Larry thought about all the times he'd reminded her to use coasters, to fold his shirts a certain way, to make sure the refrigerator was stocked with his preferred brand of sparkling water. Trivial demands for someone who'd once held lives in her hands. What happened? He asked. Why did you leave nursing? Diana's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. She turned back to the cutting board. Her movement slower now. That's a long story, Mr. Smith, and I have breakfast to prepare. Please. The words surprised them both. Larry couldn't remember the last time he'd said please to Diana. I want to understand. Diana's hand stopped moving. She stood there, back to him, silent for so long that Larry thought she'd refuse. Then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. I had a son, Marcus. He was 17. Had. Past tense. Larry's chest tightened. Marcus was everything to me, Diana continued, still not turning around. Smart, funny, full of dreams. He wanted to be an architect. Used to sketch buildings on every surface he could find. Napkins, newspapers, the backs of my nursing schedules. A small smile touched her lips at the memory. His father left when Marcus was 3, so it was just us. I worked double shifts to save for his college fund. Emergency room nursing pays well if you're willing to work nights, weekends, holidays. I was willing to work anything. She picked up an apple, turning it slowly in her hands. One night I was at the hospital. It was my 14th hour on shift. We'd had 3 trauma cases come in back to back, a car accident, a construction injury, a heart attack. I was exhausted. My supervisor asked if I could stay another 4 hours. We were short-staffed. I said yes. I always said yes. Diana's voice remained steady, but Larry heard something beneath it, something ancient and aching. Marcus called me around midnight. He was at a friend's house studying for finals. He asked if I could pick him up. It was raining and the buses weren't running that late. I told him I couldn't leave work. I told him to call a cab, that I'd reimburse him when I got home. The apple slipped from her hands, rolling across the counter. Diana didn't reach for it. He didn't call a cab. He decided to walk. It was only 2 miles. He thought he'd be fine. Larry's throat constricted. He knew where this was going. A drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection 3 blocks from our apartment. Marcus didn't see it coming. He died before the ambulance arrived. Diana's hands gripped the counter's edge. I was at the hospital saving strangers while my son died alone in the rain. The silence that followed was profound, terrible. Diana, Larry whispered. I'm so sorry. She nodded, still not turning around. The hospital offered counseling, time off. They were understanding. But every time I put on my scrubs, every time I walked through those emergency room doors, all I could see was Marcus. All I could think was, I chose this job over him. I chose other people's children over my own son. That's not fair to yourself, Larry said. You were helping people. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I? Diana finally turned to face him, and Larry saw tears tracking silently down her cheeks. I knew he needed me. He called and asked for help, and I chose work. Just like I'd chosen work for 17 years. I thought I was building a better future for him, but I was missing his present. Missing him. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so human, so raw, that Larry had to look away from the intensity of it. After the funeral, I couldn't go back. Every patient that reminded me of what I'd lost. Every save felt hollow because I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. I quit, sold our apartment, Everything reminded me of him. Diana's voice grew quieter. I had some savings, but not enough. Hospital bills, funeral costs, debt Marcus's father left behind that I'd been paying off. The money ran out faster than I expected. So you became a maid. I became invisible, Diana corrected softly. That's what I needed. To disappear into someone else's life. To serve without being seen. To exist without having to explain or remember or feel. She picked up the knife again, her hands resuming their work with automatic precision. Your previous housekeeper was retiring. The agency sent me. You hired me without asking many questions. I was grateful for that. Larry thought back 3 years trying to remember Diana's interview. He couldn't. He'd probably been on a conference call, barely glancing up, letting his assistant handle the details. Just another hiring decision in a life full of them. For 3 years, Diana continued, slicing strawberries with mechanical efficiency. I've cleaned your home, cooked your meals, existed in the background. It was exactly what I needed. Quiet, simple, safe. But you kept your skills, Larry said. Your medical training, you didn't forget. You don't forget 15 years of emergency medicine, Mr. Smith. It's in my bones, in my hands. Diana held up her fingers, studying them as if seeing them for the first time. Last night, when I heard Miss Becca struggling to breathe, I didn't think, I just moved. Muscle memory, training. The part of me I thought I'd buried came back. You saved her life. I did my job. Diana's tone shifted back toward professional distance. And now I need to finish preparing breakfast before Miss Becca wakes up. Diana, stop. Larry moved closer, his frustration building, not at her, at himself. You saved my daughter's life. You don't get to brush that off and go back to cutting fruit like nothing happened. What would you like me to do, Mr. Smith? Diana met his eyes, and for the first time he saw steel beneath her quiet exterior. Would you like me to accept your gratitude, your praise? Should I expect a raise, a promotion? Should I tell Miss Becca that I once had a son too, and that saving her broke open everything I've been trying to keep closed for 3 years? The words hung between them, sharp and true. I don't need recognition, Diana said more gently. I need to do my job. I need routine. I need the simplicity of knowing my place and staying in it. That's what keeps me together, Mr. Smith. Please don't take that away from me. Larry stared at her, understanding and not understanding simultaneously. Here was a woman with skills that could command 6 figures in any hospital, choosing to fold his laundry for a fraction of that salary. Here was someone who'd once run toward emergencies, now hiding in the margins of his life. Not because she had to, but because she needed to. I won't tell Miss Becca, Diana added quietly, about my past, about Marcus. Children don't need to carry adults' grief. She should just think I knew some first aid. That's enough. Is it? Larry asked. Is it enough for you to keep pretending you're less than you are? Diana's smile was sad, knowing, I'm not pretending, Mr. Smith. I'm surviving. There's a difference. She turned back to the stove, adjusting the heat under the oatmeal, and Larry recognized the gesture for what it was, a dismissal, a boundary being drawn. She'd given him her story more than she'd given anyone in 3 years, he suspected, but she wouldn't let him fix it, wouldn't let him transform her tragedy into some redemptive arc that made him feel better about his own blindness. The coffee's ready, Diana said, her voice returning to its usual gentle professionalism. I'll bring your cup to the dining room with breakfast in 5 minutes. Will you be eating with Miss Becca this morning? Yes, Larry said quietly. I will. Very good, sir. Larry stood there a moment longer, wanting to say something more, something that would bridge the chasm between them. But what could he say? That he was sorry for her loss, for overlooking her, for building a life so insulated that he'd never considered the complex human beings who made it possible. All of it felt inadequate, so he simply nodded and turned to leave. Mr. Smith? He paused at the doorway. Thank you for asking, Diana said, still facing the stove. About my past. Most people don't. I should have asked 3 years ago. Perhaps, Diana adjusted the flame on the burner. But you're asking now, that counts for something. Larry returned to Becca's room, his mind churning. His daughter was awake, sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. "Daddy, is Miss Diana making breakfast?" "She is, sweetheart. She saved me, didn't she?" Becca's eyes were wide, solemn with a child's intuitive wisdom. "I remember, when I couldn't breathe. She made it better." "Yes," Larry said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "She did." "She's really nice," Becca said simply. "I like her." "You like her," Larry thought. "But have you ever really seen her? Have I taught you to see the people who serve us, or have I taught you my own blindness?" Dr. Chen arrived an hour later, examined Becca thoroughly, and pronounced her recovered with instructions to monitor her closely and adjust her asthma management plan. Diana served them all tea in the living room. Doctor, patient, grateful father. Then quietly excused herself to clean the kitchen. Through it all, she remained what she'd always been, present but invisible, capable but unassuming, essential but overlooked. Except now, Larry saw her, and he couldn't unsee what he'd discovered. As Dr. Chen left and Becca napped again, Larry found himself standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, listening to the sounds of Diana working. Running water, the gentle clink of dishes, the soft hum of a woman who'd learned to find peace in the mundane. She'd asked him not to change anything, not to complicate her carefully constructed invisibility, but Larry knew with absolute certainty that everything had already changed. He just didn't yet know what to do about it. The days that followed moved with a strange, dreamlike quality, familiar rhythms hiding fundamental shifts beneath their surface. Larry went through the motions of his life, conference calls, board meetings, emails that demanded immediate responses. But something essential had fractured in his ability to care about any of it. He'd sit in his home office staring at quarterly projections that once commanded his complete attention and find his mind wandering to the woman folding laundry in the next room. 3 days after Becca's attack, Larry canceled a meeting with potential investors, something he would have considered professional suicide a week ago, because he couldn't stop replaying the moment Diana had knelt beside his daughter. The certainty in her hands, the calm in her voice, the way she'd saved Becca while he'd been useless, paralyzed, reduced to nothing despite all his power. He'd built an empire on the belief that wealth created control, that money bought solutions, that influence meant power. Diana Roberts had shattered that illusion in 15 minutes now. 4 nights after the crisis, Larry sat alone in his study at 2 a.m, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk, memories playing through his mind like accusations. 6 months ago, Larry had hosted a dinner party for potential business partners. 20 guests, 5 courses, imported wine that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. Diana had served each course with quiet efficiency, practically invisible in her server's uniform. One of the guests, Michael Chen, a venture capitalist Larry was courting, had snapped his fingers at Diana when he wanted more wine. Not called her name, not said, "Excuse me," just snapped his fingers like summoning a dog. And Larry had said nothing, hadn't even noticed really. Diana had simply refilled the glass and moved on. But he remembered now. Remembered the gesture with sudden, burning clarity. Remembered how Diana's expression hadn't changed, hadn't shown even a flicker of the humiliation she must have felt. How many times had Larry himself done something similar? Not snapping fingers, perhaps, but dismissing her presence, talking over her, forgetting she was even in the room? How many times had he discussed private business matters, confidential deals, personal problems, while she served dinner, as if she were furniture that couldn't hear, couldn't understand, couldn't matter? The shame of it made his stomach turn. 1 year ago, Diana had requested a day off, the only one she'd asked for since starting. Larry's assistant had mentioned it in passing during a morning briefing. "The maid needs next Thursday off," she'd said. Something about an appointment. "Fine," Larry had replied without looking up from his phone. "Tell her to arrange coverage." That was it, the extent of his consideration. He'd never asked what the appointment was for, never wondered if it was important, never considered that it might have been the anniversary of her son's death, and she'd needed to visit his grave. He'd treated her request like a minor scheduling inconvenience. Christ, what kind of person had he become? 2 years ago, shortly after Diana started working for him, she'd done something small, made Becca's favorite cookies without being asked, after overhearing that Becca had a bad day at school. Larry had been pleased, certainly, had told Diana good work in passing, but he'd never asked how she knew chocolate chip cookies with sea salt were Becca's favorite. Never wondered what kind of attention, what kind of care it took to notice and remember such details about a child who wasn't her own. He'd simply accepted the gesture as what he paid her for. Service. Invisible, unacknowledged labor that made his life run smoothly. Larry stood from his desk, restless, and moved to the window. Manhattan glittered below him, a kingdom he'd conquered through ruthlessness, strategy, and an unshakable belief in his own superiority. From up here, people looked like ants, insignificant, interchangeable. How many Dianas had he stepped over on his way to this view? The worst part, the part that made him want to hurl the scotch glass through the window, was that he'd thought himself enlightened, progressive. He donated to charities, employed diverse staff, paid competitive wages. He'd congratulated himself on being one of the good ones, as if basic decency deserved a medal. But beneath all that performance, he'd still seen the world through a hierarchy of worth determined by wealth and status. CEOs at the top, service workers at the bottom, value measured by income, education, social capital. Diana had operated within his home for 3 years with skills that could save lives. Wisdom earned through tragedy, a complete inner world he'd never bothered to ask about, and he'd reduced her to a function, a role, a service provider who existed to make his life easier. The power dynamics were so deeply embedded in his worldview that he hadn't even recognized them as dynamics. They were just the way things were, natural, inevitable, except they weren't natural. They were constructed by people like him, for people like him. And Diana, brilliant, capable, grieving Diana, had been forced to make herself small enough to fit into the spaces his privilege created. A soft knock on the study door startled him. "Mr. Smith?" Diana's voice tentative. "I saw your light on. Can I get you anything?" It was 2:15 in the morning. Why was she awake? Larry opened the door to find Diana in her robe, her hair down for the first time he could remember, making her look younger and more vulnerable. "I heard you moving around," she explained. "I wanted to make sure everything was all right, that Miss Becca hadn't—" "She's fine," Larry said quickly, "sleeping peacefully. I just couldn't sleep myself." Diana nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The fear stays with you. After something like that, it's normal." "Is it?" Larry's laugh was bitter. "I keep replaying it. How helpless I was, how nothing I'd built or achieved mattered when it counted." "It mattered to Miss Becca that her father was there," Diana said gently, "that he loved her enough to panic. Children know the difference between absence and presence." The words landed with unexpected weight. Diana would know about absence, wouldn't she? About being present for strangers while her son needed her. "Can I ask you something?" Larry said. "And I want you to be honest." Diana's expression grew cautious. "Of course, Mr. Smith." "Do you hate me?" The question surprised them both. Diana blinked, clearly not expecting it. "Hate you?" she repeated. "Why would I hate you?" "For how I've treated you. For never seeing you. For—" Larry gestured helplessly. "For all of it." Diana was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Smith, you've never been cruel to me. You pay fairly. You don't make unreasonable demands. You say thank you when you remember to. That's more than many people in your position offer." She paused. "But if you're asking whether I wish you'd seen me as a whole person, rather than a function these past 3 years, yes, I do wish that." The honesty of it stung more than anger would have. "You have every right to hate me," Larry said quietly. "Hate takes energy I don't have," Diana replied with a sad smile. "And what would it accomplish? You're not malicious, Mr. Smith. You're just accustomed to a certain way of seeing the world. Most wealthy people are. It's not personal." "That makes it worse," Larry said. "If I'd been actively cruel, I could change that behavior. But this is about my entire worldview, about power structures I benefit from without even thinking about them." "Yes," Diana agreed simply, "it is." Her lack of comfort or reassurance was somehow more powerful than anger. She wasn't going to make this easier for him, wasn't going to absolve him or tell him he wasn't that bad. She was simply stating facts, allowing him to sit with the discomfort of his own realization. "I don't know how to fix this," Larry admitted. "You can't fix it," Diana said. "Not overnight, not with a grand gesture. This isn't about throwing money at a problem or changing one policy. It's about fundamentally rethinking how you see people. All people, not just me. Where do I even start?" Diana considered the question carefully. "Start by remembering that everyone you encounter has a story as complex as your own. The doorman who greets you, the barista who makes your coffee, the janitor who cleans your office. They all have loves and losses, dreams and disappointments, skills and sorrows you know nothing about." She pulled her robe tighter. "And then ask yourself, does my behavior honor that complexity, or does it erase it?" Larry felt the weight of her words settle into his chest. It was such a simple framework, and yet applying it would require examining every interaction, every assumption, every unconscious bias he carried. "I want to do better," he said, "with you, with everyone." "Then do better," Diana replied matter-of-factly, "but don't expect me to teach you how or to celebrate your progress. That's not my job." The boundary was clear, firm, and absolutely fair. She'd already given him more emotional labor, explaining her pain, witnessing his guilt, offering perspective on his growth, than he had any right to expect. "You're right," Larry said. "I'm sorry for even asking." "Don't apologize, Mr. Smith. Just learn." Diana turned to leave, then paused. "And maybe get some sleep. You look exhausted." "Diana," Larry called as she reached the hallway. She looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, but especially for being honest with me just now." Diana's expression softened slightly. "Good night, Mr. Smith." She disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps quiet on the marble floors. Larry watched her go, this woman who'd saved his daughter and his soul in the span of one impossible week. The next morning, Larry woke with new determination. He couldn't undo 3 years of blindness, but he could start changing his behavior immediately. At breakfast, when Diana served his coffee, he looked directly at her. "Thank you, Diana, and please sit down for a moment if you have time." Diana hesitated, clearly confused. "Sir? I wanted to ask how you're doing after everything that happened with Becca. That must have been stressful for you too." "I'm fine, Mr. Smith," Diana said carefully, not sitting. "And I wanted to apologize," Larry continued, "for the dinner party 6 months ago. When one of my guests was rude to you, I should have said something." Diana's eyebrows rose slightly. "You remember that?" "I've been remembering a lot of things," Larry admitted. "Things I should have paid attention to at the time." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across Diana's face. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. But then her professional mask returned. "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Smith. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare Miss Becca's breakfast." She left before he could say more. Larry watched her go, frustration building. He wanted to fix this, to make her trust him, to prove he'd changed. But Diana wasn't making it easy. She remained polite, professional, distant, the same as always, as if his newfound awareness meant nothing. And slowly, painfully, Larry began to understand. This wasn't about him. Diana's guardedness wasn't a problem for him to solve. It was a boundary she'd earned the right to maintain. She'd opened up once about her past, given him that gift of vulnerability, and now she was closing the door again, protecting herself. Because Larry's realization, however genuine, didn't erase 3 years of being invisible, didn't undo the power imbalance that still existed between them. He was still her employer. She was still dependent on his goodwill for her livelihood. His growth was real, but it didn't automatically entitle him to her trust. She would continue doing her job with quiet dignity. She would be polite and professional. But she wouldn't reward his belated awareness with intimacy or approval. And that, Larry realized, was exactly as it should be. Over the following days, Larry made small changes. He learned the names of the building's staff and greeted them personally. He asked his assistant about her family instead of just barking orders. He tipped service workers generously and looked them in the eye when he said thank you. But with Diana, he simply tried to be present, to see her, to acknowledge her humanity without demanding that she acknowledge his growth. Some mornings she seemed to soften slightly, a small smile when he asked if she needed anything from the store, a momentary pause when he complimented her cooking. Other days she remained completely professional, untouchable in her dignity. Larry learned to accept both, to let her set the pace, to understand that his journey toward becoming a better person wasn't about receiving forgiveness or gratitude from the people he'd harmed through his ignorance. It was simply about doing the work. And slowly, painfully, fundamentally, Larry Smith began to change. But the real question remained, would change be enough? Could a man who'd spent 35 years building walls of privilege truly learn to see beyond them? Dinah seemed unconvinced. She continued her work with the same quiet grace, neither encouraging nor dismissing his efforts. And in that silence, Larry found his greatest teacher. 2 weeks after the crisis, Larry found himself doing something he'd never done before, lingering in the kitchen while Diana worked. It started accidentally. Blam. He'd come downstairs for water and found Diana preparing lunch, humming softly to herself, a melody he didn't recognize but found oddly comforting. Instead of taking his water and leaving, he'd leaned against the counter and asked, "What are you making?" Diana had looked up, surprised. "Chicken soup," Miss Becca requested it. "The kind with the little star pasta?" The very same. A small smile had touched Diana's lips. "She says they're lucky stars." Larry had smiled too, remembering Becca's insistence on that particular pasta shape. She's always been superstitious that way. And somehow, that simple exchange had opened a door. Now, 3 days later, Larry found himself seeking out these moments. Not constantly, he was trying to respect Diana's boundaries, but enough that a tentative rhythm emerged. Morning coffee conversations that stretched a few minutes longer. Questions about meal planning that turned into discussions about Becca's preferences, her moods, the little things Diana noticed that Larry had missed. "She's been having nightmares," Diana mentioned one morning, her hands busy kneading dough for fresh bread. "She comes to the kitchen around 2 a.m., says she can't sleep." Larry looked up from his laptop, concerned. "She hasn't told me that." "Children often don't tell their parents what frightens them most," Dinah said gently. "They're afraid of adding to your worry." "What does she say to you?" "She asks if I think she'll stop breathing again, if next time I won't be there to help." Dinah's hands worked the dough with practiced ease. "I tell her that her body is strong, that we have better medications now, that her daddy would never let anything happen to her." The casual inclusion of that last part, her daddy would never let anything happen to her, made Larry's throat tight. Diana believed that, or at least she told Becca she did. "Thank you," Larry said, "for being there for her, for knowing what to say." Diana shrugged, dividing the dough into portions. Children need consistency after trauma. Someone steady they can turn to. "She's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her too," Diana said softly, and something in her voice made Larry wonder if she was thinking about Marcus, about the child she'd lost, and the one who now depended on her. The shift happened gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Larry began asking Diana's opinion on things that had nothing to do with household management. What she thought about Becca's new school assignment, whether he should accept a speaking engagement that would take him away for 3 days, how to handle a disagreement Becca had with a friend. Diana's answers were always thoughtful, nuanced in ways that surprised him. She had a way of cutting through complexity to reach the heart of matters, a skill likely honed in emergency rooms where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. "Miss Becca doesn't need you to solve her problems with Jasmine," Diana said one afternoon when Larry had asked for advice. "She needs you to listen and validate her feelings. At 9 years old, friendship drama feels like the end of the world. Honor that emotion even if the situation seems trivial to you." Larry had taken the advice. That evening, instead of offering solutions, he'd simply listened as Becca tearfully explained that Jasmine had shared a secret with another girl. He'd held her while she cried and told her that betrayal hurt, no matter how small it seemed. Becca had fallen asleep in his arms, peaceful for the first time in days. The next morning, he'd thanked Diana. She'd simply nodded, returning to folding laundry as if she hadn't just taught him more about parenting than he'd learned in 9 years. Becca's attachment to Diana deepened as well, in ways that were both touching and slightly heartbreaking. She'd always liked Diana well enough, appreciated the cookies and the gentle reminders to clean her room. But now Becca sought Diana out actively. She'd wander into the kitchen while Diana cooked, asking questions about ingredients and techniques. She'd follow Diana while she cleaned, chattering about school and friends and the book she was reading. "Miss Diana, do you think mermaids are real?" Becca asked one Saturday afternoon, perched on a kitchen stool while Diana chopped vegetables. "I think the world is full of mysteries we haven't discovered yet," Diana replied diplomatically. "So who's to say?" "That's what I think too." Becca's face lit up. "Daddy says mermaids are scientifically impossible, but he also said I couldn't hold my breath for 2 minutes, and I totally can." Diana laughed, a sound Larry realized he had rarely heard. It was warm, genuine, transformative. "Your daddy is very smart about many things, but he doesn't know everything." "Nobody knows everything," Becca declared with 9-year-old wisdom. "That's why we have to keep asking questions." Exactly right. Larry, working in his study with the door open, found himself smiling at their exchange. Becca was learning from Diana in ways she'd never learned from him, learning about gentleness, about quiet strength, about how to find joy in simple things. But it was the nighttime that revealed the true depth of Becca's attachment. Larry discovered it by accident one night, coming downstairs for water at 1 a.m. He found Becca curled up on the kitchen floor, her head in Diana's lap, while Diana stroked her hair and hummed that same melody he'd heard weeks ago. "Shh, baby girl," Diana murmured. "The bad dreams can't hurt you here." "What if I stop breathing again and you're just there?" "Then your daddy will be there, or the doctors, or the new inhaler we have. You're surrounded by people who will keep you safe." "But what if, Becca?" Diana's voice was firm but loving. "Fear is a feeling, not a fact. You feel scared, and that's okay. But the feeling doesn't mean the bad thing will happen. Can you tell the difference?" Becca was quiet for a moment, thinking. Fear is a feeling and not a fact. "That's right. Now, how about we make some warm milk and honey? That always helps me sleep." Larry had retreated silently, his heart full of something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper, recognition of what Diana was giving them both. Not just service, but care. Not just labor, but love. The following week, Larry made a decision. He called Diana into his study, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Diana sat, her posture cautious. "Is something wrong, Mr. Smith?" "No, the opposite, actually." Larry leaned forward. "Diana, I want to talk about your position here, about your compensation." Something flickered across her face. Was it fear? "You've been invaluable to this household," Larry continued, "especially these past few weeks. I'd like to increase your salary significantly, 50% more, and I'm creating a new position, household manager. It would involve oversight of any other staff we hire, management of household operations, and," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "and serving as a personal advisor to me and Becca on matters where your expertise would be helpful." Diana's hands gripped the armrests of the chair. "Mr. Smith, I appreciate the offer, but—" "You don't have to answer now," Larry interrupted. "Think about it. I know it's a big change." "It's not about thinking," Diana said quietly. "It's that I don't know if I want that kind of position." Larry frowned, confused. "Why not? The salary increase alone. It's not about money." Diana stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Mr. Smith, but can I be honest with you?" "Please." Diana was silent for a long moment, her reflection in the glass looking troubled. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "When I took this job 3 years ago, I needed simplicity. I needed to be invisible, to not matter too much to anyone because—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Because if I didn't matter, it wouldn't hurt when I left." "When you left?" Larry's stomach dropped. "Are you planning to leave?" "I'm always planning to leave," Diana said, turning to face him. "Not immediately, not tomorrow. But I never let myself settle anywhere. Never let myself become indispensable. Because indispensable means attached. And attached means Her voice broke slightly. Attached means it will hurt when loss comes again. And loss always comes. Larry felt like he'd been punched. Diana, I'm not going anywhere. Neither is Becca. We need you here. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Diana whispered. Don't you see? Miss Becca is starting to depend on me. You're asking me for advice like I'm part of this family, but I'm not part of this family, Mr. Smith. I'm an employee, and I need to keep those lines clear because if you don't what? If I don't, I'll start to care too much. Diana's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'll start to love that little girl upstairs like she's my own. I'll start to invest in her future and worry about her happiness and feel responsible for her well-being. And when something inevitably changes, when you don't need me anymore, or when I decide I need to move on, it will destroy me. Again. The rawness of her confession filled the room like smoke. Marcus's death taught me that love is dangerous, Diana continued, that caring deeply means grieving deeply. I can't go through that again, Mr. Smith. I don't have another loss left in me. So I keep things simple. I do my job. I maintain boundaries. I prepare for the day when I'll leave, because that day always comes. Larry stood slowly, moving toward her but stopping short of touching her. What if it doesn't have to be that way? What if you could let yourself care without the fear of loss? There is no caring without fear of loss, Diana said simply. They're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Then maybe the fear is worth it, Larry said. Maybe caring about Becca, even if it scares you, is better than protecting yourself from pain by staying distant. That's easy for you to say, Diana replied, her voice gaining an edge. You still have your daughter. You don't know what it's like to lose a child and have to keep living afterward. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Larry thought about Becca, about those terrible minutes when he thought he might lose her. The terror that had consumed him. The way the world had narrowed to just her struggle to breathe. Everything else meaningless. You're right, he said quietly. I don't know, I can't imagine, but Diana, isn't the love you're giving Becca, even if it scares you, isn't it also healing? Doesn't part of you come alive when you hold her during nightmares? When you teach her about mermaids and lucky stars? Diana's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. And that terrifies me more than anything. Larry did touch her then, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. I can't promise you that nothing will ever change, that Becca will always need you, or that I'll always be able to employ you. Life is uncertain. You know that better than anyone. Then why are you asking me to stay, to commit, to let myself care? Because Becca needs you, not just as an employee, but as someone who loves her, someone who sees her completely and shows up for her completely. Larry paused. And because I think maybe you need her too, need us, not to replace Marcus, nothing ever could, but to give yourself permission to love again despite the risk. Diana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture Larry had come to recognize as her trying to regain control. What if I can't do it? What if I fail her the way I failed Marcus? You didn't fail Marcus, Larry said firmly. You were human. You made a choice that anyone might have made. You couldn't have known what would happen. But I should have. No. Larry's voice was gentle but unyielding. You should have nothing. You did your best with the information and resources you had. That's all any of us can do. Diana looked at him, really looked at him, and Larry saw something shift in her expression. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of permission to trust. I need time, she said finally, to think about the position, about all of this. Take all the time you need, Larry replied. But Diana, whether you accept the promotion or not, whether you stay for 1 more year or 10, I want you to know something. What? You matter, not because of what you do for us, but because of who you are. Your presence in this household has changed us. Changed me. I see the world differently because of you. And Becca, he smiled deep down. Becca is learning what it means to be cared for by someone extraordinary. That's a gift that will shape her entire life, regardless of how long you're here. Fresh tears spilled down Diana's cheeks, but she was smiling through them now. You've come a long way, Mr. Smith. I've had a good teacher, Larry said, even if she didn't want the job. Diana laughed, that warm, transformative sound, and for a moment the weight between them lifted. But as she left his study, Larry saw the tension return to her shoulders, the fear reasserting itself. Diana might be opening up, might be allowing herself to care, but she was also preparing for the inevitable day when it would all end. Because in Diana's experience, everything ended. Everyone left or was taken away. Larry wanted to prove her wrong, wanted to show her that not all attachments ended in loss, that sometimes people stayed. But he also knew that words meant nothing compared to time, to consistency, to showing up day after day and proving that he meant what he said. The bond between them was growing, fragile and tentative as new growth after a fire. The question was whether it could survive the weight of Diana's fear and the complications that were inevitably coming. Diana didn't give Larry an answer about the promotion. Not that week or the next, but something had shifted between them, a crack in the wall she'd built, letting in slivers of light. It was small things at first. Diana accepting his offer to sit during their morning conversations instead of standing, her occasionally sharing an opinion without being asked. The way she'd started saying Larry instead of Mr. Smith when Becca wasn't around, after he'd requested it for the third time. It feels strange, she'd admitted, informal. We're past formality, don't you think? Larry had replied. After everything. Diana had considered this, then nodded. Perhaps we are. But it was 3 weeks after their conversation in his study when Diana finally opened the door wider. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Becca was at a friend's birthday party, leaving the penthouse unusually quiet. Larry had planned to catch up on work, but found himself restless, wandering to the kitchen where Diana was preparing dinner for the week ahead. Can I help? He asked. Diana looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, surprise flickering across her face. Help? I know my way around a knife, Larry said. My mother insisted I learn basic cooking skills, said no son of hers would be helpless in a kitchen. A small smile touched Diana's lips. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Larry moved to the sink to wash his hands. She died when I was 23. Breast cancer. I'm sorry, Diana said softly. That's young to lose a mother. It is. Larry dried his hands and took up position beside her at the counter. It's also when I learned that all the money in the world can't buy more time. She had the best doctors, the best treatments, and it still wasn't enough. Diana handed him a cutting board and pointed to a pile of carrots. Julienne? I'll do my best. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, the rhythmic sound of knives against cutting boards filling the kitchen. It was peaceful in a way Larry hadn't experienced before. Productive quiet shared with someone he was beginning to trust. Can I ask you something? Larry said finally. And you can tell me to mind my own business if you want. Diana's hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their work. Ask. The nursing. You said you worked emergency medicine for 15 years. That's a long career. Where did you train? Mount Sinai, Diana said. I did my nursing degree there, then specialized in emergency and trauma care. Larry's hand stopped moving. Mount Sinai was one of the top medical schools in the country. That's impressive, competitive. I was a good student, Diana said simply, and I was driven. My mother cleaned houses her whole life, raised 3 kids alone after my father left. I watched her come home every night with her hands raw and her back aching, and I swore I'd do better. Make her sacrifices mean something. Did she see you graduate? Diana's smile was bittersweet. She did, sat in the front row, cried through the whole ceremony. She died 2 years later. Heart attack. She was only 56. That's young. Poverty ages you, Diana said matter-of-factly. Years of stress, inadequate health care, working multiple jobs. It takes a toll the wealthy don't always see. My mother probably added a decade to her biological age through sheer exhaustion. Larry felt the familiar sting of shame. How many times had he complained about being tired after a long day in his climate-controlled office, with assistants handling his logistics and chefs preparing his meals? What did he know about real exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of physical labor and financial insecurity? So you became a nurse to honor her sacrifice, Larry said. Says, yes, and because I was good at it. Diana's voice held quiet pride. I was very good at it. I could assess a trauma patient in seconds, prioritize treatments, stay calm when everyone else was panicking. I saved lives, Larry, hundreds of them probably. Every shift was a battle, and most shifts we won. That must have been incredibly fulfilling. It was. Diana set down her knife, her gaze distant. Until it wasn't. Larry waited, sensing they were approaching something important. After Marcus died, Diana continued softly, I couldn't separate the work from the loss anymore. Every child who came through those emergency room doors became Marcus. Every frantic parent became me on the worst night of my life. I'd be treating a teenager's broken arm, and suddenly I'd be back at that intersection, seeing my son in the rain. She picked up her knife again, her movements more agitated now. I started making mistakes, small ones at first. Forgetting to chart medications, mixing up patient files, nothing that caused harm, but enough that my supervisor noticed. She suggested I take a leave of absence, get counseling, process my grief. Did you? I tried. 6 months of therapy, medication for depression and anxiety, support groups for bereaved parents. Diana's laugh was hollow. Everyone said the same thing. Give it time, be patient with yourself. The pain will ease. But it didn't ease. Larry, it metastasized. Spread into every corner of my life until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. So you quit. I quit nursing, I quit therapy, I quit the apartment where Marcus had grown up, where his drawings were still on the refrigerator and his basketball shoes were still by the door. Diana's voice was steady, but Larry saw her knuckles whiten around the knife handle. I sold or donated everything I could bear to part with. Packed the rest, his baby blanket, some photos, his favorite book, into a box I've never opened. And I found work that didn't require me to be anything but present, where I could disappear into routine. Housekeeping. Invisibility, Diana corrected. That's what I was looking for. A way to exist without being seen, to serve without being known, because being known meant being vulnerable. And I couldn't afford vulnerability anymore. Larry set down his knife, turning to face her fully. Diana, can I tell you what I see when I look at you? I'm not sure I want to know, she said, but there was curiosity beneath the wariness. I see someone who lost everything and chose to keep going. Someone who could have given up and no one would have blamed you, but instead found a way to survive, to build a new life, even if it wasn't the one you'd planned. Larry paused. I see strength that doesn't need recognition, dignity that doesn't depend on status, wisdom earned through suffering. Diana's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You see too much. Maybe I'm finally seeing what was always there. Larry leaned against the counter. You saved my daughter's life using skills you'd buried for 3 years. Skills that represent 15 years of training and experience. That's not nothing, Diana, that's extraordinary. I did what anyone with medical training would do. But you're not just anyone with medical training, Larry insisted. You are someone who chose to step forward despite your trauma, despite every reason you had to stay hidden. You acted when I was paralyzed. You saved Becca when I couldn't. Stop, Diana said, her voice sharp. Please stop. Stop what? Stop praising me like I'm some kind of hero, like I'm special. Diana set her knife down with more force than necessary. I'm not, Larry. I'm just a woman who survived longer than she wanted to, who found herself in the right place at the right time. That's luck, not virtue. I disagree. Of course you do. Diana's laugh was bitter. Because you've never had to question your own worth. You were born with value, inherited wealth, connections, education. You got to build an empire because you never had to wonder if you deserved the foundation you started with. The words stung, but Larry couldn't deny their truth. You're right, I've had advantages you haven't. And that's fine, Diana said, her voice softening. I'm not angry about it. I'm just trying to explain why your praise feels uncomfortable. You see my survival as strength, but sometimes I see it as cowardice. I ran away from nursing instead of pushing through. I hid instead of healing. I chose the easy path. There's nothing easy about grief, Larry said firmly. And choosing to survive, choosing to keep going even when you wanted to give up, that is strength. That is courage. Diana shook her head. You don't understand. In the ER, we had a saying, you can't save everyone, but you try anyway. That was the code I lived by for 15 years. But when it came to Marcus, I didn't try. I chose work over my son. I prioritized strangers over the person who mattered most. And now you want to celebrate me for using those same skills to save Becca? It feels like a betrayal of Marcus's memory. The confession hung between them, raw and painful. Larry moved closer, his voice gentle. Diana, you didn't choose work over Marcus. You made a reasonable decision based on the information you had. Your son needed a ride, not emergency intervention. You couldn't have predicted what would happen. But I should have known. Larry's voice was firm. You're a nurse, not a psychic. You assessed the situation, a teenager needing transportation on a rainy night, and made a practical decision. The tragedy that followed wasn't your fault. It was the fault of a drunk driver who made a choice to get behind the wheel. Intellectually, I know that, Diana whispered. My therapist said it 100 times. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things. Then let me tell you what I feel emotionally, Larry said. I feel gratitude that you were here when Becca needed you. I feel respect for the career you built and the lives you saved. I feel admiration for your ability to keep going after devastating loss. And I feel, he paused, searching for the right words. I feel honored that you've trusted me enough to share your story. Diana wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. You make it sound noble, but the truth is I didn't want to share it. You just kept pushing. Fair enough, Larry said with a small smile. I can be persistent. Stubborn, Diana corrected, but there was warmth in her voice. They returned to their cutting boards, working in silence again. But this silence felt different, deeper, more connected. Like they'd crossed some invisible threshold into territory neither had expected to explore. Can I ask you something now? Diana said after several minutes. Anything. Why does this matter so much to you? My past, my story. Why do you care? Larry considered the question carefully. Because I spent 3 years not caring. 3 years seeing you as a function instead of a person. And when you saved Becca, I realized what I'd missed. Who I'd missed. He paused. I can't undo those 3 years. But I can try to see you clearly now, to understand who you are beyond the role I assigned you. And what if who I am disappoints you, Diana asked? What if I'm not as strong or wise or special as you want to believe? Then you'll still be Diana, Larry said simply. Still someone who matters. Still someone worthy of being seen. Diana's hands stilled on the cutting board. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. My whole life, people have valued me for what I could do for them. My mother needed me to succeed, so her sacrifices weren't wasted. My patients needed me to save them. Marcus needed me to provide. And now you need me to help with Becca and somehow prove that you've grown as a person. Diana, let me finish, she said gently. I'm not saying that's wrong. We all need things from each other. That's human. But what I'm trying to tell you is that I don't know how to be valued for just existing, for being Diana separate from my utility. That's foreign to me. Larry felt the weight of her words. She was right. He'd been praising her strength, her skills, her resilience, all things she did or had, not who she simply was. Then maybe we both have things to learn, he said quietly. You need to learn that you have inherent worth beyond your usefulness, and I need to learn how to see people's humanity without reducing them to their function in my life. That's quite an education, Diana said with a small smile. Worth it, though, Larry replied. If we both come out better on the other side. Diana nodded slowly, returning to her vegetables with renewed focus. I'm still thinking about the promotion, about everything you offered. Take your time. But I want you to know, Diana paused, choosing her words carefully. I want you to know that this conversation, all of our conversations these past few weeks, they've meant something. You've made me feel seen in a way I haven't felt in years, and that's both terrifying and healing. I'm glad, Larry said sincerely, even if it's terrifying. They finished preparing the week's meals side by side, occasionally bumping elbows or reaching for the same spice, finding a rhythm that felt natural and unforced. When they were done, Diana surveyed the containers of prepared food with satisfaction. "Becca should be home soon," she said, glancing at the clock. "Right." Larry helped her store the containers in the refrigerator. "Diana, thank you for trusting me with your story. I know it wasn't easy." "No," Diana agreed, "but maybe necessary. Maybe it's time to stop hiding from my past and start—" She trailed off, uncertain. "Start what?" Diana met his eyes and Larry saw vulnerability there, raw and real and brave. "Start living again, instead of just surviving." Before Larry could respond, the front door burst open and Becca's voice rang through the penthouse. "Dad, Miss Diana, I'm home, and you'll never guess what happened at the party." Diana's professional mask slipped back into place, but not before Larry saw something in her expression that gave him hope, the tentative beginning of a smile that reached her eyes. Maybe she wasn't ready to accept the promotion. Maybe she wasn't ready to let go of her carefully constructed walls completely. But she was ready for something, and that was a start. The change in Larry didn't happen overnight. It crept into his life like dawn, gradual, inevitable, transforming everything it touched. It started with small gestures that his assistant, Jennifer, noticed first. "Good morning, Jennifer," Larry said one Monday, actually looking up from his phone when he greeted her. "How was your son's soccer game this weekend?" Jennifer blinked, clearly startled. You remembered? You mentioned it on Friday, said he was nervous about playing goalie for the first time." "He did great, actually, made 3 saves. Jennifer's surprise softened into a genuine smile. "Thank you for asking, Mr. Smith." Larry nodded, feeling a small spark of satisfaction. When had he stopped asking his employees about their lives? When had their humanity become invisible to him? He thought about Diana's words. "Everyone you encounter has a story as complex as your own." Jennifer had a story, a son who played soccer, a life outside these office walls that Larry had never bothered to inquire about. "I'm glad to hear it," Larry said. "Tell him congratulations from me." As Jennifer left to prepare for the morning meeting, Larry caught her glancing back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Confusion, suspicion, or maybe just the cautious hope that this change might be real. The shift extended beyond pleasantries. In a board meeting 2 weeks later, Larry did something unprecedented. He admitted he was wrong. The VP of Operations, Marcus Chen, had proposed a restructuring plan that would save money by outsourcing their customer service department to a call center overseas. The numbers were compelling, a 40% reduction in labor costs. The old Larry would have approved it immediately. Numbers were numbers. Efficiency was efficiency. But the new Larry, the one Diana had inadvertently created, found himself asking different questions. "What happens to our current customer service staff?" Larry asked. Marcus looked confused by the question. "They'd be let go, obviously. We'd offer severance packages, of course, 2 weeks per year of service." "That's 63 people," Larry said, scanning the report. 63 people who'd lose their allowance so we can increase our profit margin by 3%. "It's business, Larry," said Richard Hoffman, the CFO. "Sometimes tough decisions—" "I understand it's business," Larry interrupted. "But what if we made different decisions? What if we valued employee retention and loyalty as much as we value quarterly returns?" The room went silent. Several board members exchanged glances. "Are you suggesting we turn down a 40% cost reduction?" Richard asked carefully. "I'm suggesting we explore alternatives," Larry replied. "What if we invested in training our current staff? Gave them tools to be more efficient? Maybe the cost savings aren't as dramatic, but we keep experienced employees who know our company and our customers." "That's not the direction we usually go," Marcus said. "I know." Larry leaned back in his chair. "But maybe it should be. Maybe there's value in stability that doesn't show up in quarterly projections. Maybe employees who feel valued and secure work harder, stay longer, and create better outcomes for our customers." "That's a significant philosophical shift," Richard observed. "Yes," Larry agreed, "it is." He thought about Diana, about how her value to his household went far beyond the tasks she performed, about how her presence, her wisdom, her care had transformed his home in ways no efficiency metric could capture. Give me alternative proposals, Larry said. Options that prioritize our people alongside our profits. I want to see what's possible when we expand our definition of success. The board members nodded, though Larry could see skepticism on several faces. They thought this was a phase, a temporary deviation from the ruthless pragmatism that had built his empire. Maybe they were right. Or maybe this was the beginning of something better. The most significant shift happened at home, in conversations with Diana that had become a regular part of Larry's routine. One evening, Larry brought his laptop to the kitchen while Diana prepared dinner. Becca was at a sleepover, leaving the penthouse quiet. "Can I run something by you?" Larry asked. Diana looked up from the pasta she was stirring. "Of course, Vasim. I'm considering a new initiative at the company, a profit-sharing program that would give all employees, from executives to entry-level staff, a stake in the company's success." Larry turned the laptop so Diana could see the preliminary proposal. "But I'm getting pushback from the board. They think it's too generous, that it will set a precedent we can't sustain." Diana wiped her hands on a towel and studied the screen. "What do you think?" "I think people work harder when they have a personal investment in the outcome, when they know their effort directly benefits them, not just shareholders." Larry paused. "But I also wonder if I'm being naive, if I'm letting my recent awakening cloud my business judgment." Diana was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. "Can I tell you about the hospital where I worked?" "Please." Mount Sinai had a program where ER staff got bonuses based on patient outcomes and satisfaction scores. Not just doctors, nurses, techs, even custodial staff who kept the department clean and functional. Diana returned to her pasta, stirring slowly. Everyone had skin in the game. Everyone knew their work mattered to the collective result. Did it work? Our department had the highest retention rates in the hospital, the lowest error rates, the best patient feedback. Diana smiled slightly, because when you treat people like partners instead of expendable resources, they respond accordingly. They care more, they innovate more, they stay longer. Larry leaned forward. "So you think I should push forward with the profit sharing?" "I think you should ask yourself what kind of company you want to build," Diana said. "One that extracts maximum value from employees and discards them when they are no longer useful? Or one that recognizes employees as whole human beings whose well-being is connected to the company's success?" When you put it that way, the answer seems obvious. "Then why are you asking me?" Diana met his eyes with gentle challenge. "Because I value your perspective," Larry said honestly. "Because you've seen both sides. You've been both a professional with autonomy and an agency, and you've been in service positions where you were invisible. You understand these dynamics in ways I never will." Diana nodded slowly. "Then here's my perspective. Your board is afraid of change, afraid that generosity might be mistaken for weakness, afraid that treating employees well might somehow make the company less competitive. Are they wrong? Ask yourself this. Would you rather work for a company that sees you as a cost to be minimized, or one that sees you as an investment to be nurtured?" Diana turned off the stove. The answer tells you everything you need to know about which approach builds better organizations. Larry sat back, absorbing her words. She just articulated what he'd been feeling but couldn't quite express, that his transformation wasn't about abandoning business principles, but about expanding them to include human dignity. "I'm going to implement it," Larry said decisively, "the profit-sharing program, over the board's objections if necessary." "Good," Diana said simply. "Will you help me?" The question surprised them both. "Not officially. I'm not trying to force you into a role you're not ready for. But will you let me bounce ideas off you? Get your perspective when I'm making decisions that affect people's lives." Diana was silent for a long moment. Then, "On one condition." "What's that?" "That you also develop your own instincts. Learn to see people clearly without needing me to translate for you." Diana's smile was gentle. "I won't always be here, Larry. You need to internalize these lessons, not just borrow my perspective." The reminder that she might leave sent a chill through him, but Larry nodded. "Fair enough, though I hope you'll be here longer than you think." We'll see, Diana said noncommittally. Over the following weeks, the changes Larry implemented began to ripple through his company. The profit-sharing program was announced to mixed reactions, enthusiasm from employees, concern from investors. But Larry held firm, explaining in a company-wide email that sustainable success required investing in people, not just products. He instituted new policies, increased parental leave, mental health support, professional development budgets for all employees. He started attending staff meetings at different departments, learning names and asking questions about their work. Jennifer D., his assistant, pulled him aside one day. "Mr. Smith, can I ask what's happened to you?" "What do you mean?" "You're different, kinder, more present." Jennifer hesitated. "People are talking about it. Some think you're sick. Others think you're being forced out and trying to improve your reputation." Larry laughed, though the observation stung. "I'm not sick. I'm just learning to see people I should have seen all along." "Well, whatever it is," Jennifer said carefully, "it's making a difference. Morale is up. People feel valued. Some employees who were considering leaving have changed their minds." "That's good to hear." "It is." Jennifer paused. "Though I'll be honest, some of the executives are worried. They think you're going soft, that these changes will hurt profitability." "Let them worry," Larry said. "We'll prove them wrong." And slowly they did. Employee satisfaction scores rose. Productivity increased. Customer service improved. The profit-sharing program, rather than draining resources, seemed to unleash creativity and commitment that had been dormant. Not everything was perfect. Some executives left, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new culture. Some investors grumbled about prioritizing people over profits, but Larry found he didn't care the way he once would have. His definition of success had expanded beyond quarterly earnings and market share. Now it included whether his employees felt respected, whether his company reflected values worth defending, whether he could look at himself in the mirror without shame. Diana's influence was everywhere, though she'd never set foot in his office. Her perspective had become his lens, her wisdom his guide. She taught him that real power wasn't about domination or control. It was about service, empathy, and recognizing the humanity in everyone. One evening, as Larry and Diana shared tea after Becca had gone to bed, he tried to articulate what her presence had meant. "You've changed my life," he said simply. Diana smiled, cradling her mug. "You've changed your own life. I just happened to be here when you were ready." "That's generous, but not entirely true." "Isn't it?" Diana tilted her head. "Larry, you chose to see me differently. You chose to ask questions and listen to answers. You chose to examine your assumptions and change your behavior. Those were your choices. Inspired by you." "Perhaps," Diana conceded. "But inspiration is cheap. Action is what matters. And you've taken action. In your home, your company, your life. That's all you." Larry wanted to argue, to insist she deserved more credit, but he also recognized the gift she was giving him, ownership of his own growth. She wasn't letting him reduce his transformation to her influence, because that would make it fragile, dependent on her presence. She was teaching him to stand on his own. Even as she prepared him for the day she might leave, the thought still terrified him. But it also honored what Diana had been trying to tell him all along, that real change had to come from within, that borrowed wisdom was just the beginning. The hard work was making it his own. "Thank you," Larry said quietly, "for everything, for seeing potential in me I didn't see in myself." Diana's smile was warm, genuine. "You're welcome. Now go to bed. You have a big presentation tomorrow, and you need rest." It was a gentle dismissal, a return to her role, but Larry heard the affection beneath it. They were finding a new equilibrium, not employer and employee, not quite friends, but something in between, something undefined and therefore precious. And for now, that was enough. Diana stood in her small bedroom on the building's service floor, staring at the box she'd kept sealed for 3 years. It was late, past midnight, and sleep eluded her as it often did. The penthouse above was silent. Becca slept peacefully, her nightmares becoming less frequent. Larry was likely working in his study, as he did most nights, and Diana was alone with her ghosts. The box was unremarkable. Brown cardboard, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed with time. Inside were the pieces of Marcus she couldn't bear to part with, but also couldn't bear to see. His baby blanket, soft and worn, the acceptance letter from the architecture program he'd never attend, his favorite book, The Little Prince, with his annotations in the margins, a basketball shoe, the left one because she could only find one in the chaos after his death. For 3 years, the box had sat in her closet, untouched, a tomb for a life that ended too soon. But tonight, something pulled at her. Maybe it was the conversation with Larry about living instead of just surviving. Maybe it was Becca's growing attachment, the way the child looked at her with trust and love that both healed and terrified her. Maybe it was simply that grief, after being buried long enough, demands to be acknowledged. Diana's hands trembled as she peeled back the tape. The smell hit her first, Marcus's cologne, faint but unmistakable, clinging to the blanket after all these years. She lifted it out, pressing the fabric to her face, and the tears came hard and fast. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered into the empty room. "I'm so sorry." The guilt was a living thing coiled around her ribs, squeezing until she couldn't breathe. 3 years hadn't diminished it. 3 years of penance, of making herself small and invisible, of serving others, none of it had absolved her. Because how could she forgive herself for choosing work over her son? How could she accept happiness, connection, purpose, when Marcus would never have those things? Diana pulled out The Little Prince, opening to a page marked with Marcus's neat handwriting. "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." He'd underlined it twice. Written in the margin, "Mom, this is you. You see what others miss." Fresh tears spilled onto the page, smudging the 17-year-old ink. Did she, though? Had she really seen what mattered? She'd seen patients' injuries, diagnosed their emergencies, saved their lives. But had she seen her own son's loneliness? Had she noticed how rarely she made it home for dinner? Had she understood that he needed her presence more than her paycheck? The worst part was knowing Marcus had never blamed her. He'd been proud of her work, understanding about the missed events, patient when she had to cancel plans. He'd made it easy for her to choose her career, never once making her feel guilty, and now guilt was all she had left of him. Diana didn't realize she was crying loud enough to be heard until a soft knock came at her door. She quickly wiped her eyes, shoving the blanket back into the box. "Yes?" "Diana, it's Larry. I heard. Are you okay?" She almost said yes, almost slipped back into her professional mask and sent him away. But something stopped her. Exhaustion, maybe, or the realization that pretending was its own kind of prison. "Come in," she said quietly. Larry opened the door, his expression shifting from concern to alarm when he saw her tear-stained face. "What happened? Is it Becca?" "No, Becca's fine." Diana gestured helplessly at the box. "I'm just having a moment." Larry's gaze fell on the open box, the blanket visible inside, and understanding dawned. "Marcus?" Diana nodded, unable to speak. "Can I sit?" Larry asked, gesturing to the small chair by her desk. She nodded again, and he sat, leaving space between them but offering his presence. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just waited. "I opened his box," Diana said finally. "First time since I packed it 3 years ago." "That must be hard." "It's impossible," Diana whispered. "Being here with you and Becca, it's making me feel things again. Hope, connection, purpose. And every time I feel those things, I think about Marcus and how he'll never feel anything again. And the guilt just..." She pressed her hand to her chest. "It crushes me." "Diana, do you know what the worst part is?" Diana's voice broke. "I'm happy sometimes now. I laugh with Becca. I interrupt our conversations. I feel useful and seen and valued. And then I remember that I have no right to those feelings. That Marcus is dead because I chose my career over him, and I don't deserve to move on." Larry leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Diana, listen to me. Marcus wouldn't want this for you. No child wants their parent to stop living because they're gone. You don't know that." "I do, actually." Larry's eyes were sad, "because I know what it's like to lose a parent. When my mother died, you know what her last words to me were? Promise me you'll be happy." Not successful, not rich, happy. She was dying, and all she cared about was whether I'd let myself live fully after she was gone. Diana wiped her eyes with shaking hands. That's different. How? Because your mother died of cancer. You didn't cause it. You didn't make a choice that led to her death. And neither did you, Larry insisted. Diana, a drunk driver killed Marcus. Not you, not your job, not your decision to ask him to take a cow. A person who chose to drink and drive killed your son. That's where the responsibility lies. But if I had just left work, then maybe he'd have been in the car with you when the drunk driver ran the red light, Larry said. Maybe you'd both be gone. Or maybe the drunk driver would have hit someone else's child, and a different mother would be living with this guilt. You can't know, Diana. You can't rewrite history with hypotheticals. Diana shook her head, the logic not penetrating the wall of guilt. I just keep thinking, if I could go back, I'd choose differently. I'd leave work. I'd pick him up. I'd save him. Of course you would, Larry said softly. Every parent who's lost a child feels that way. But you can't go back. None of us can. We can only choose what we do with the time we have left. Diana looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never noticed before. Fear, deep, primal fear barely contained beneath his composed exterior. You're terrified, she said with sudden clarity, of losing Becca. Larry's composure cracked. Every single day, since the asthma attack, I barely sleep. I check on her constantly. I imagine worst-case scenarios and try to prepare for them. I'm terrified that I'll make the wrong choice, be in the wrong place, fail her when she needs me most. That's what parenthood is, Diana said gently, her own pain momentarily forgotten in recognition of his. Living with the fear that you'll fail the person you love most. How did you do it, Larry asked. How did you parent Marcus for 17 years with that fear? I didn't always, Diana admitted. Sometimes I let work distract me from it. I told myself that providing for him was enough, that financial security was love in action. I used my career as a shield against the vulnerability of motherhood. And now you think that was wrong. Now I think it was human, Diana said slowly, surprising herself. I was doing my best with what I knew. I loved Marcus fiercely. I showed up for him in the ways I knew how. Was it perfect? No. Did I miss things? Yes. But does that mean I didn't love him enough? She paused, the answer forming as she spoke. No, it just means I was human. Larry smiled slightly. You're preaching to yourself. Maybe I am, Diana agreed. Maybe I needed to hear it out loud. They sat in silence for a moment, two people bound by their fears and failures, finding unexpected comfort in shared vulnerability. Can I tell you something? Larry said finally. Something I haven't admitted to anyone? Of course. I'm afraid I'm not enough for Becca, that even with all my resources and advantages, I can't give her what she really needs. Larry's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. When she had that asthma attack and I couldn't help her, I realized that I'd been coasting on the illusion of control, believing that my wealth could protect her from everything. But it can't, and I don't know how to parent without that safety net. Diana's heart cracked open at his honesty. This powerful man, this billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, was just a scared father trying not to fail his daughter. You want to know what Becca needs most? Diana asked. Please. She needs you to be present, to see her, to let her be imperfect and scared and human. Diana smiled. She doesn't need you to protect her from everything. She needs you to walk beside her through the hard things, to show her that it's okay to struggle, to fail, to need help. Like you do for her, Larry said. Like we both do, Diana corrected. Larry, you've changed so much these past few months. Becca sees it. She told me last week that you're her favorite person to talk to now because you actually listen instead of trying to fix everything. Larry's eyes glistened. She said that? She did. You're already giving her what she needs. You just don't recognize it yet. Larry stood, moving closer to where Diana sat on her bed. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? You've already told me once. That was before, Larry said. Before I understood how deeply you're struggling. Before I saw this room, this box, this grief you carry alone. He gestured around the small space. Now I see someone even braver than I thought. Someone who's rebuilding herself piece by piece, who's learning to open her heart again, despite every reason not to. Diana shook her head. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Larry said. It's choosing to move forward anyway. And you're doing that, Diana, with Becca, with me, with yourself. What if I fail? The question came out small, vulnerable. Then you'll be human, Larry echoed her earlier words back to her. And you'll try again. Diana felt something shift inside her. Not healing exactly, but perhaps the first crack in the armor of her guilt. The first possibility that maybe, just maybe, she deserved a second chance at living. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to stay. How to let myself care without constantly preparing to lose everything again. Neither do I, Larry said honestly. I don't know how to parent without the illusion of control. I don't know how to run a company with compassion when I was trained to prioritize profit. I don't know how to be the person Diana Roberts is teaching me to be. Then I guess we're both learning, Diana said softly. Together? Larry offered his hand. Diana looked at it for a long moment, this gesture of partnership, of equals reaching across the divide of their fears and failures. Taking his hand meant admitting she wasn't alone, meant accepting that she mattered beyond her utility, meant risking attachment when loss had taught her that attachment always ended in pain. But it also meant honoring Marcus's memory by choosing to live fully rather than merely survive. It meant showing Becca that healing was possible after devastating loss. It meant believing that she deserved connection, purpose, love. Not because she'd earned it, but because she was human. Diana placed her hand in Larry's. Together, she agreed. And for the first time in 3 years, the weight on her chest lightened just enough to let her breathe. 3 weeks passed in a fragile peace. Diana began accepting the promotion, not the title yet, but the reality of it. She sat at the dining table during breakfast instead of standing by the kitchen door. She offered opinions without being asked. She laughed more freely, the sound becoming a regular part of the household's rhythm. Becca bloomed under the attention of 2 adults who truly saw her. Her nightmares faded. Her confidence grew. She started a project at school about everyday heroes and chose Diana as her subject, much to Diana's embarrassed pleasure. Larry continued his transformation, both at home and at work. The profit-sharing program was yielding results beyond what even he'd hoped. Employee retention was up. Innovation was flourishing. His company was becoming known not just for its products, but for its culture. Everything felt like it was moving in the right direction. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything fell apart again. Larry was in a video conference with international partners when his phone buzzed insistently. Once, twice, 3 times. He ignored it. This deal was too important to interrupt. Then Jennifer burst into his office, her face pale. Mr. Smith, you need to come home. Now it's Becca. Larry's heart stopped. What happened? Diana called. Becca collapsed at school. They're bringing her home now. Diana said to tell you it's her asthma, but it's bad. Larry was out of his chair before Jennifer finished speaking, leaving the conference call without explanation, grabbing his jacket and phone as he ran for the elevator. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. Not again. Please, not again. The drive home took 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. Larry's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. He tried calling Diana twice, but both calls went to voicemail. She was probably too busy helping Becca to answer. When he burst through the penthouse door, he found them in Becca's bedroom. His daughter was propped up on pillows, her face frighteningly pale. Her breathing labored despite the oxygen mask Diana had placed over her nose and mouth. Diana sat beside her, one hand on Becca's wrist, monitoring her pulse, the other stroking her hair with infinite gentleness. "Daddy?" Becca wheezed when she saw him, trying to sit up. "Stay still, sweetheart," Diana said firmly but kindly. "Let the oxygen work." Larry dropped to his knees beside the bed, taking Becca's free hand. It was cold, clammy. "What happened?" The school said. "Gym class," Diana explained, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. They were running laps. Becca pushes herself too hard. By the time the teacher noticed she was in distress, the attack was already severe. Why didn't they call an ambulance? They did, but Becca asked them to bring her home first. She wanted... Diana's voice softened. She wanted me. Larry looked at his daughter, seeing the fear in her eyes, but also the trust. Even in crisis, even struggling to breathe, Becca had known where she needed to be, who she needed. The ambulance is on its way, Diana continued, but I've stabilized her for now. Her oxygen saturation is improving. Breathing is getting easier. As if to confirm this, Becca's shoulders relaxed slightly, her chest rising and falling with less desperation. There you go, Diana murmured. That's my brave girl. Larry felt tears burning his eyes. Here they were again, his daughter in danger. Him helpless, Diana saving the day. Except this time something was different. This time, he understood what was happening. This time he recognized his dependence. The paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, examined Becca thoroughly, and confirmed what Diana had already told them. The crisis had passed. They recommended a follow-up with her pulmonologist to adjust her treatment plan, but she was stable enough to stay home rather than go to the hospital. After they left, after Becca had fallen into an exhausted sleep with improved breathing, Larry found Diana in the kitchen making tea with shaking hands. Diana! She turned and he saw what she'd hidden from him earlier. The toll this had taken on her. Her face was drawn, her eyes haunted. This wasn't just professional competence. This was personal terror, barely contained. She's okay, Diana said as much to herself as to him. She's going to be okay. Thanks to you again. Larry moved closer. Diana, I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here. If you hadn't been able to help her, His voice broke. I need you. We need you. I know I shouldn't say that. I know it's not fair to put that on you, but it's true. Diana set down her teacup with a sharp clink. Larry, we need to talk. Something in her tone made his stomach drop. Okay. Sit down. Larry sat at the kitchen island, dread pooling in his gut. Diana remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding something in or together. When she spoke, her voice was measured, careful. When I came to work for you 3 years ago, I needed to disappear, to be invisible, to serve without being seen. You gave me that, whether you meant to or not. She paused. But these past few months, you've pulled me back into visibility, into mattering, and that's been both healing and terrifying. Diana, if I've pushed too hard, let me finish. Diana's tone was gentle but firm. What happened today with Becca forced me to face something I've been avoiding. When that school called and said she couldn't breathe, my first thought wasn't, I'm her maid, or this is my job. It was, I have to save her because I love her. Larry felt his throat tighten. That's good, isn't it? Is it? Diana's eyes were bright with unshed tears, because the second thought I had was, what if I fail? What if I lose another child I love? And then I realized I've let myself become dependent on this family, on Becca needing me, on you valuing me, on this role that feels safe and known. I don't understand what you're saying. Diana took a deep breath. I'm saying that I've traded one form of hiding for another. Before, I hid by being invisible. Now I'm hiding by being indispensable, by making myself so necessary to you and Becca that I don't have to figure out who Diana Roberts is beyond her utility to others. Larry felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. You're not just utility to us, you're family. Am I? Diana's voice was kind but challenging. Or am I the help who you've elevated because I saved your daughter? Larry, we've never truly dealt with the power dynamics here. I'm still your employee. I still depend on you for housing, income, security. No matter how much respect you show me, no matter how much Becca loves me, I'm still fundamentally in a subordinate position. Then let's change that, Larry said desperately. Take the promotion, equal partnership. I'll pay you whatever. It's not about money, Diana interrupted. It's about autonomy. It's about building something that's mine, not just being essential to something that's yours. The words landed like a blow. Larry understood, even as he wanted to argue. Diana was right. She'd gone from serving him invisibly to serving him visibly, but it was still service. Still her life revolving around his needs, his daughter, his household. What are you saying? Larry asked quietly. That you want to leave? Diana was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice trembled. I'm saying I don't know. Today, when Becca needed me, I didn't hesitate. I did what needed to be done because I love her. Because I love both of you, if I'm being honest. But afterward, sitting with her while she slept, I realized that love isn't enough. I need purpose beyond being needed. I need to matter on my own terms, not just because I'm useful to others. You do matter, on your own terms. Do I? Diana met his eyes. Larry, if Becca's asthma was cured tomorrow, if you didn't need my medical expertise anymore, would I still be here? Would you still value me? Or would I go back to being the maid? That's not fair, Larry protested. You know I've changed. You know I see you. I do know that, Diana agreed, and I'm grateful for it. But seeing me isn't the same as letting me be free. And right now, I'm not free. I'm trapped by my own fear of loss and by this dynamic where I'm always the helper, never the helped, always the savior, never the saved. Larry felt panic rising in his chest, the same panic he'd felt watching Becca struggle to breathe. What do you need? Tell me what you need, and I'll make it happen. That's exactly the problem, Diana said softly. You can't make this happen. I need to figure out who I am beyond service, beyond grief, beyond my relationship to you and Becca. And I can't do that while living here, while being your employee, while being caught in this web of dependence, both yours on me and mine on you. So you are leaving. Larry's voice was hollow. I don't know, Diana repeated, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Part of me wants to stay forever, wants to watch Becca grow up, be there for her first day of high school, her graduation, her wedding. Wants to keep having morning conversations with you about philosophy and parenting and what it means to live well. Then stay, Larry pleaded. Diana, please. We'll figure out the rest. We'll redefine the relationship. Larry, Diana's voice stopped him. I love you both too much to stay like this. Don't you see? If I stay now, I'll always wonder if I was brave enough to choose myself, to build my own life instead of living in the margins of yours. And that wondering will poison everything good we've built. Larry felt like he was drowning. There has to be another way. Some middle ground where you can find yourself without leaving us. Maybe there is, Diana said, but I can't see it right now. Today scared me, Larry, not just because Becca was in danger, but because I realized how much I need this. Need to be needed. Need to matter through emergency intervention. That's not healthy, that's not healing. That's just another version of the same pattern that cost me my son. The comparison hit hard. Diana was right. She'd been using her role here the same way she'd used nursing, as a shield against her own vulnerability, a way to feel valuable without having to feel worthy. What if we worked on it together, Larry offered desperately. What if you stayed, but we consciously shifted the dynamic, made space for you to explore your own interests, build your own purpose, while still being part of our lives? Diana smiled sadly. That's generous, and maybe eventually that could work. But right now I'm too enmeshed, too dependent. I need distance to gain clarity. How much distance? I don't know yet, Diana admitted. Maybe just some time away. Maybe something more permanent. I need to figure that out. Larry stood, moving toward her but stopping short of touching her, respecting her space even as his heart broke. Can I ask one thing? Of course. Don't decide right now, not in the aftermath of today's crisis, not while you're scared and exhausted. Give it time. Give us time. Larry's voice was raw with emotion. I can't force you to stay. I won't try, but I'm asking you, please don't make this decision from a place of fear. Diana looked at him for a long moment, seeing his vulnerability, his genuine care, his desperate hope. Okay, she said finally, I won't decide today, but Larry, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that I might leave, that this might not have the ending you want. I know, Larry whispered. I can't imagine this house without you. Can't imagine Becca growing up without you. Can't imagine becoming who I'm supposed to be without your wisdom to guide me. That's exactly why I might need to go, Diana said gently, because you need to learn to stand on your own, to trust your own judgment, to be the father Becca needs without relying on me to translate her needs. And I need to learn to matter without being essential to someone else's crisis. They stood in silence, the weight of the conversation settling around them like snow. Finally, Diana said, I should check on Becca. Larry nodded, unable to speak. As Diana left the kitchen, Larry sank back onto the stool, his head in his hands. He'd been so focused on his own growth, on becoming a better person, that he hadn't considered what Diana needed. Hadn't realized that his dependence on her, even when wrapped in respect and care, was still a form of constraint. He'd asked her to stay, to be part of their lives, to let herself care. But he'd never asked what she wanted for herself, what dreams she'd deferred, what life she might build if she wasn't busy holding his together. Upstairs, Becca slept peacefully, breathing steadily. And somewhere between the kitchen and the bedroom, Diana Roberts was deciding whether love was enough reason to stay or whether she needed to leave to finally learn how to save herself. The decision came to Larry in the middle of the night, 2 days after Diana's confession in the kitchen. He'd been lying awake, replaying their conversation, understanding finally what he'd been too blind to see. Diana didn't need him to give her a better position in his household. She needed the freedom to build her own foundation, her own purpose, her own life. And if he truly cared about her, truly saw her as the remarkable woman she was, then he had to let her go, but not without giving her the means to fly. The next morning, Larry asked Diana to meet him in his study. She came hesitantly, probably expecting another plea for her to stay. Instead, she found him with papers spread across his desk and an expression she couldn't quite read. Sit, please, Larry said. Diana sat, her posture guarded. I've been thinking about what you said, about needing to build something that's yours. Larry slid a folder across the desk. I want to help you do that. Diana opened the folder cautiously. Inside were incorporation documents for a nonprofit organization, preliminary budgets, legal filings, all bearing the name the Marcus Roberts Foundation for Emergency Medical Access. Her breath caught. What is this? It's a healthcare nonprofit focused on providing emergency medical training and resources to underserved communities, Larry explained. Places where people die from treatable conditions because they don't have access to trained professionals or basic equipment. Places like the neighborhood where Marcus died. Diana's hands trembled as she paged through the documents. Larry, I don't understand. You told me you need purpose beyond being needed. You need autonomy. You need to matter on your own terms. Larry leaned forward. This is how you do that. You take everything you learned in 15 years of emergency medicine and you use it to save people who fall through the cracks of our healthcare system. You build something that honors Marcus's memory while healing your own heart. I can't afford to. You're not paying for it. I am. Larry held up a hand before she could protest. Not as charity, as seed funding for an organization I believe in. I've allocated $2 million to get the foundation started, enough to hire staff, establish training programs, purchase equipment, rent office space. After that, you'll need to fundraise, improve sustainability. But you'll have runway to build something real. Diana stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this? Because you were right, Larry said simply. I was asking you to stay in a role that served my needs, not yours. I was making my growth dependent on your presence, which wasn't fair to either of us. This way you get to be free, to build, to lead, and I get to support something meaningful while learning to stand on my own. But what about Becca? What about Becca will be heartbroken, Larry admitted, and so will I. But you staying here out of obligation or guilt would eventually hurt all of us. Better to give you the freedom to choose. If you want to stay involved in our lives, that's your choice. But it won't be because you're our employee or because we need you to survive. It'll be because you want to. Diana covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Larry wanted to comfort her but held back, respecting the space she needed to process this. Finally, she looked up. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Larry replied. Say you'll consider building something that makes Marcus's death mean something. Say you'll give yourself permission to be more than what others need you to be. Diana looked down at the papers again, seeing her son's name printed there in official legal language. The Marcus Roberts Foundation. A legacy, a purpose, a way forward that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. I'll think about it, she whispered. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Diana began to dream again. She spent hours researching emergency medical access gaps in underserved communities. She reached out to former colleagues from her nursing days, tentatively rebuilding connections she'd severed in her grief. She drafted training curricula for community health workers. She visited neighborhoods where ambulance response times were triple the national average, where basic first aid knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. And slowly, the weight she'd carried for 3 years began to lift. Larry watched her transformation with a mixture of joy and bittersweet sadness. Diana was coming alive again, speaking with passion, making plans, imagining a future. But that future was one that would take her away from his household, from the daily rhythms they'd built together. Becca sensed the change too. One evening, she crawled into Diana's lap while Diana was working on grant proposals at the dining table. "Are you leaving us, Miss Diana?" Becca asked quietly. Diana set down her pen, wrapping her arms around the child she'd come to love. "I'm starting something new, sweetheart. A special project to help people who need medical care but can't always get it." "But you'll still live here? Still make me Lucky Star soup?" Diana's heart clenched. "I'll probably need to move closer to where the foundation's office will be, but that doesn't mean I won't see you. You are very important to me, Becca. That doesn't change." "Promise?" "I promise," Diana said, meaning it completely. "You and your daddy changed my life. I'm not disappearing. I'm just growing like you grow every year, getting taller, stronger, braver. That's what I'm doing too." Becca considered this, her 9-year-old wisdom processing complex emotions. "Daddy says growing up means things change, but the important stuff stays." "Your daddy is very smart," Diana said, kissing the top of Becca's head. "The important stuff definitely stays." 3 months later, the Marcus Roberts Foundation officially opened its doors in a modest office space in Brooklyn, not far from where Diana's son had died. The opening ceremony was small, just Diana, Larry, Becca, a few former nursing colleagues, and representatives from the community organizations they'd be partnering with. No press, no fanfare, just people committed to making sure others didn't fall through the cracks the way Marcus had. Diana stood at the front of the room, looking at the faces gathered there, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. "My son Marcus died because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time," she began, her voice steady. "But also because our healthcare system fails people every day. People in neighborhoods without adequate emergency services, people who can't afford ambulances, people who don't know basic first aid that could save a life." She gestured to the training materials displayed on tables around the room. "This foundation exists to change that. We're going to train community health workers, provide free emergency response equipment to underserved areas, teach people that they have power to save lives, even without medical degrees or expensive technology." Diana's eyes found Larry and Becca in the crowd. "I learned something important recently. That real power doesn't come from wealth or status or professional credentials. It comes from showing up for each other, from seeing people's humanity, from choosing compassion over convenience." Larry smiled, recognizing his own journey in her words. "Marcus will never get to become the architect he dreamed of being," Diana continued, her voice thickening with emotion. "But through this work, through every life we save, through every person we train, his dream of building something that matters lives on. And maybe, in some small way, that's enough." The room erupted in applause. Diana stepped back, overwhelmed, and felt a small hand slip into hers. Becca had made her way to the front, standing beside her with fierce pride. "You did it, Miss Diana," Becca whispered. "You're a hero again." Diana knelt down, looking into the child's eyes. "We're all heroes, sweetheart. Every time we choose to help instead of look away. Every time we see someone struggling and step forward. You don't need special powers or training. You just need courage and compassion." "Like you taught me," Becca said. Like we taught each other, Diana corrected. 6 months into the foundation's operation, Diana's work was exceeding all expectations. They'd trained 50 community health workers to distributed emergency supply kits to 36 neighborhoods, responded to 14 situations where their intervention prevented tragedy. Larry supported the foundation not just financially but personally, serving on the board, using his business connections to open doors, learning about healthcare inequity with the same intensity he'd once applied to market analysis. But more importantly, he'd learned to parent Becca without relying on Diana's constant presence. He'd internalized the lessons Diana taught him about listening, about presence, about seeing his daughter's full humanity. Becca was thriving, confident, compassionate, secure in her father's love and attention. Diana had moved into a small apartment near the foundation's office, but she had dinner with Larry and Becca every Sunday, not as their employee, not as someone obligated to show up, but as someone who chose to be part of their lives because she wanted to be. The power dynamics had finally, truly shifted. One Sunday evening after Becca had gone to bed, Diana and Larry sat on the penthouse balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below. "Can I tell you something?" Larry said. "Something I have been afraid to say." "Always," Diana replied. "I'm proud of you." Larry's voice was thick with emotion, not in a patronizing way. "Not as your former employer, but as someone who's watched you transform yourself, rebuild your life, honor your son's memory while creating your own future. You're extraordinary, Diana." Diana smiled, the compliment landing differently than it would have a year ago. Now she could receive it without deflecting, without minimizing, without immediately pivoting to service. "I'm proud of you too," she said. "You've become the father Becca deserves, the leader your company needs, the person you were always capable of being." "We've both grown," Larry observed. "We have," Diana agreed, "though I think Becca's taught us as much as we've taught each other. She has a gift for seeing what matters." "She learned that from you." "And from you," Diana countered, "from watching you choose humility over pride, compassion over control, people over profits." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in crisis and emerged as genuine partners, not in employment, but in the deeper work of becoming fully human. "Do you ever regret it?" Larry asked. "Leaving the household? Starting over?" Diana considered the question carefully. "I regret that I didn't have the courage to do it sooner. I regret the years I spent hiding instead of healing. But leaving your employment to build the foundation? No. That was the rightest thing I've done since Marcus died." "Even though it was hard?" "Especially because it was hard," Diana said. "Growth requires letting go of what feels safe. I was safe in your household, valued, needed, comfortable. But I wasn't free, and I needed freedom more than I needed safety." "And now," Larry asked, "are you happy?" Diana smiled, a genuine expression of contentment that had been absent for so long. "I'm getting there. Some days are harder than others. Grief doesn't disappear just because you're doing meaningful work. But I'm building something that matters. I'm honoring Marcus's memory. I'm helping others avoid the pain I experienced. And I'm doing it on my own terms, with my own agency. That feels like victory." "It is victory," Larry affirmed. Below them, the city hummed with millions of lives intersecting, each person carrying their own stories of joy and loss, failure and redemption. Somewhere out there, a community health worker Diana had trained was probably responding to an emergency. Somewhere, a life was being saved because Diana had chosen to transform her grief into purpose. "Thank you," Diana said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible. For pushing me when I needed pushing. For giving me the resources to build a foundation, but the freedom to build it my way." Diana turned to face him. "You could have made the foundation contingent on me staying. Could have used it to keep me tethered to your household. But you didn't. You gave freely, expecting nothing in return. That's true generosity." "You taught me that," Larry said. "You gave freely for 3 years. Your skills, your wisdom, your heart. Never asking for recognition or reward. Just showing up. I learned from watching you." "Then we're even," Diana said with a smile. "I don't think we're keeping score anymore," Larry replied. "No," Diana agreed. "I don't think we are." Inside, Becca stirred in her sleep, her breathing steady and strong. The nightmares that had plagued her after the first asthma attack were long gone, replaced by dreams of the future, of growing up in a household where she was truly seen, valued for who she was rather than who others needed her to be. She was learning from both her father and Diana that real power didn't come from wealth or status or even extraordinary skills. It came from choosing to show up fully, to see others clearly, to act with compassion even when it was difficult. She was learning that heroes weren't always the people with the most resources or the loudest voices. Sometimes they were the quiet ones who simply refused to look away when others were suffering, the ones who stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. She was learning that family wasn't just about blood or legal bonds. It was about choosing each other day after day, even when that choice was hard. Outside on the balcony, Diana and Larry continued talking, their conversation ranging from practical matters to philosophical questions. From Becca's latest school project to the foundation's expansion plans. Two people who'd started as employer and employee, who'd become teacher and student, who'd evolved into genuine partners in the messy, beautiful work of becoming better humans. Their journey hadn't been easy. There had been pain, confrontation, difficult realizations about privilege and power, fear and loss. There had been moments when staying would have been simpler than growing, but they'd chosen the harder path. They'd chosen transformation over comfort. They'd chosen to see each other fully, even when that seeing revealed uncomfortable truths. And in doing so, they discovered what true power actually meant. Not domination, not control, not even competence or expertise, just the quiet, revolutionary act of recognizing each other's full humanity and honoring it with their choices. 1 year after the foundation's opening, Diana received a call from a mother in the Bronx. Her teenage son had collapsed at a basketball game, and a community health worker Diana had trained had saved his life using CPR and an AED the foundation had provided. "I don't know who you are," the mother said through tears, "but you gave my baby back to me. How do I thank you for that?" Diana thought about Marcus, about Larry, about Becca, about all the ways we save and are saved by each other. "You don't have to thank me," Diana said gently. "Just tell your son to live fully, to choose compassion, to see people others overlook. That's all the thanks I need." When she hung up, Diana allowed herself a moment of pure gratitude, not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd found in the aftermath of loss: purpose, connection, freedom, love, and the quiet knowledge that Marcus's legacy would ripple forward through every life the foundation touched, through every person who learned to see about others clearly, through every choice to step forward instead of away. That evening, she had dinner with Larry and Becca, as she did every Sunday. And as they laughed together, shared stories, made plans for the future, Diana understood finally what healing actually meant. Not forgetting the past, not erasing the pain, but carrying it forward with grace, transforming grief into purpose, loss into love, invisibility into the most powerful visibility of all. The revolutionary act of being fully, authentically, courageously herself. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.